Hello and welcome to another edition of the Bastard Review. This time around I'm looking at ECW's Crossing the Line Again. This event took place on February 1st, 1997 in the ECW Arena in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The first match of the night is Lance Storm taking on Balls Mahoney, and I believe this is the first time both competitors were in ECW. This was a pretty good match. They held their own in the ring, and I was entertained throughout the whole match. I'm going to give this a 6 out of 10. Next up is Ricky Morton taking on Stevie Richards. You might recognize Ricky Morton as one half of the Rock and Roll Express. I think he was only in ECW for a couple of appearances, not very many. This was an alright match. It felt like it was more trying to get Stevie over than an actual competitive match. It wasn't bad, it was just there. I'm going to give this a 5 out of 10. Up next, Axel Rotten takes on Dr. Death Steve Williams. This is another match that's just okay for me. I think it was more of a setting up for what came after the match. So I'm going to give this a 5 out of 10. And after the match, Joey Styles comes down to interview Steve. We don't really see the interview. We see the after effects. Raven comes down and challenges Steve. And Steve accepts, and we now have a match for the ECW World Heavyweight title. This match is better than the previous one, but I think this should have been the main event. I think you should have spent most of this show building up Steve, because the big thing here is that up until now, Steve had never been pinned on US soil. I think for 10 years it lasted, so this was kind of major. I would have built it up and made it into a very big main event. And because they didn't, the match kind of falls short of what it could have been. But still, it's an adequate match. I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10. Up next, we have Sandman taking on Devon Dudley. And this is not a good match at all. I didn't like it one bit. I really don't see the appeal of Sandman as a wrestler. I think he's very subpar. He has no wrestling ability whatsoever, and I think the only reason why people probably like him is that they can identify with him. But honestly, I can't identify with him. I don't smoke, I don't drink, I don't carry around a Singapore cane, so he just doesn't seem like an everyman to me, and that's why I don't like him. The only of real interest to me is after the match, Bubba Ray and Spike Dudley come down, and just when you think Bubba's going to attack Devon, he attacks the Sandman instead, and then he turns on Spike Dudley as well. It's shortly after this time when I actually start liking the Dudleys, because they play excellent heels. So a bad match, I'm going to give this a 3 out of 10. Up next, the Eliminators, Perry Saturn and John Kronos take on Sabu and Rob Van Dam for the ECW World Tag Team titles. This was a great match. If you remember in my November to Remember review, I said that it would have been more memorable if the match was for the tag team titles. Well, this is what we get with this one. It's a great match. Both tag teams work very well together, and the match is just exciting, and I enjoyed it very much. I'm going to give this a 9 out of 10. After that, we have Tommy Rich taking on Terry Funk, and I feel like I'm watching an NWA video. Seriously though, this was a pretty good match. Tommy Rich was very out of shape, and the ECW crowd definitely let him know that he was. Both men were definitely not in their prime, but it was still a good match. I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10. Finally, we come to the main event, Shane Douglas, Chris Candido, and Brian Lee taking on Tommy Dreamer and the Pitbulls. This was an okay match. You know already that I'm not a fan of 6-man tags. Only this wasn't really a tag. This was more of just a melee. It was 6 men going up against each other, and it was complete chaos. A decent way to end the show. I still think the title match should have been the final match here. But, you know, not bad. I'm going to give this a 6 out of 10. At one point, Joey Styles says that Shane Douglas has crossed the line again, and I really don't understand what he meant by that. There wasn't really anything that was offensively said. So I don't get where he's saying that Douglas crossed the line again. Overall, ECW's Crossing the Line Again is another barely above average show. You've got one really great match on here, and then everything else is either slightly above average or just below. I would have cut some things from this card, shifted some of the matches around, and let those matches go a little longer than they did. I also would have definitely included the interview between Steve Williams and Joey Styles. I think that took away from Raven coming down and challenging Steve to a match. I think they could have worked that out a little better. I'm going to give this show a 6 out of 10. Thank you for listening. Please tune in again to another Bastard review when I review another wrestling DVD in my collection or anything else that crosses my path.